Each month, restaurant hospitality will put the spotlight on rising stars, up-and-coming independent restaurant leaders that represent a next generation. We'll speak with these operators and chefs about the future of independent restaurants, menu and culinary innovations, operational adaptations, lessons learned, and more. And is sponsored by Smithfield Culinary. In this episode of Rising Stars, we speak with Philip Camino, owner of Camino Industries, which recently opened the fine dining concept Fellow and is in the process of opening the new Imari, both in Los Angeles. We think Philip's star is rising. Hear what he has to say about these new concepts and operating in LA post-pandemic.
Here we go. Today we have Philip Camino, who is founder of Camino Industries here in LA. Camino Industries is parent to the Hudson and the new Fellow, which just opened in Westwood Village, the Westwood Village neighborhood of Los Angeles near UCLA in May. And Philip has a new concept also that's coming and just about to open called Imari, but I'm going to let him tell you about that. Welcome, Philip. Thanks for joining us.
Thank you. Thank you so much for having me. I really appreciate it.
So start us off by telling us about Fellow.
Well, Fellow has been a labor of love. It's been a number of years now since I've had the building. I actually took the building over in late 2016. The building has an incredible lineage. It was actually built in the late 1920s. So it's close to 100 years old, but for the first 50 years of its life, it operated as a grocery store. It was called Jorgensen's, and it was kind of the place to buy your groceries if you lived on the west side of LA. And a ton of celebrities used to buy the groceries there, like Marilyn Monroe, Joe DiMaggio, Groucho Marx. If you were anyone on the west side, that's where you shop. So it's kind of got a cool lineage of introducing LA to things that maybe they wouldn't be able to find anywhere else, because they specialized in things like imported wines and imported spices and olive oils and things that you just couldn't get in other parts of the city. It then in 1980 became the Mustache Cafe, which is a really famous LA restaurant on the west side. And it operated as that for close to 25 years. They had a really good run. So for the first 3/4 of its life, it was just these two amazing concepts. I took the building over, like I said, in 16. It took me about 2 years to restore it. It just had been worn down over the years and it hadn't really been, taken care of in a really active way. So I took it over, spent a couple years restoring it, reopened it under really kind of another premise, which was a little bit more of like a casual kind of neighborhood restaurant. And we opened and operated for close to 2 years until the pandemic hit. And unfortunately that happened. And I sort of reconcepted the entire building at that point and started to really look for really kind of high quality Michelin level talent, because I identified that on the west side of LA, there just wasn't as many fine dining options as I thought there should be. There's some amazing restaurants. You've got places like Melise and, Rustic Canyon and Naka. I mean, there's some great places, but if you look at the density of a place, of a city like LA, like particularly on the west side, and the quality of the customer on the west side, there's just not enough fine dining, in my opinion, to really service that market. So I felt as though there was an opportunity, and I went and used COVID as an opportunity to really rebuild the restaurant into a beautiful kind of multi-use space that's both an art gallery on one side and also what we consider to be a Michelin caliber restaurant on the restaurant side. So yeah, we're excited, and we just launched, and we've got some amazing people here now, and we think it's a really, really great addition to the west side of LA in terms of the fine dining aspect.
Well, and tell us a little bit about the menu and who you've brought in, because, some of the folks you have in the kitchen are come from really amazing backgrounds. They have a fantastic resume. So tell us about what you're doing there.
Yeah, it was a very curated team. So I really started with the wine, and Scott Lester joined my team a couple of years ago. He comes from the French Laundry restaurant at Meadowood, 11 Madison Park, and he's, in my opinion, one of the best sommeliers in America. He just built the wine list here at Fellow into a level 2 wine spectator award winner. So that's a very rare category. There's only about 1,300 restaurants in the world that have that designation. And I believe 14 or 15 in LA have that. And they're all much, much more mature as restaurants than we are. So we're pretty young in our existence to have that designation. It's a really special thing. We've got over 2,000 bottles of wine in the cellar here now, and I think over 500 producers now after this application process with Wine Spectator. So Scott's here. He really runs the beverage program and the service, a lot of the front of house, along with our GM, Charles Houston. Our bar director is a guy by the name of Adam Fournier, who comes from the Nomad, among other places. He's very experienced, but he was actually just named the Diageo Spirits Competition Bartender of the Year in America. So he's the best bartender in the United States, and goes to Europe to compete for best bartender in the world in July. So he's running the bar. Scott runs the wine program. Charles runs, service and front of house alongside Scott. So front of house is great. It's super dialed and just a great group of guys managing that. In the back of house, we've got just a phenomenal, who I consider to be a top 5 chef in the world, Christopher Flint. His background is he was with Make It Nice in New York. So he was at 11 Madison Park for 10 years, including when, they went through 3 Michelin stars, 7 James Beard Awards, best restaurant in the world. So just a very pedigreed, world-class guy. He then went to the Nomad side of that business and opened Nomad New York, LA, Vegas, left Make It Nice, went to work for Curtis Stone at Mod here in Beverly Hills. They won a Michelin star in 2019 under Chris's direction. So he's really kind of proven that, anywhere he goes, he makes a big impact, and he's just a phenomenal guy. I consider him a friend, and just a stand-up person who's an amazing leader, and everyone just loves and follows, and he's just a great guy to have in the building day in, day out. So really blessed and grateful that he's here. And he's been really helpful in getting this place to that next level that we were talking about before, alongside Scott's background and some of the other people that we have here now. We have a phenomenal team, and I'm just, really happy and grateful every day that we've been able to assemble this level of talent here.
And so how would you describe his menu? Because, and I can say one thing that I know for sure is that it's beautiful. The plates are beautifully presented. And, coming out of this pandemic, people are so happy to get back into restaurants.
Yes.
It's just great to see, sort of something that's really creatively presented and lovely, to have put before you once again after all this time. So,
Yeah.
So how would you describe the menu though, from the culinary standpoint?
Yeah, isn't it great that people are getting back into restaurants and not eating, Thai food in their sweatpants on the couch anymore?
Out of a box, yeah.
So we're very excited about that. I'm very excited about, what's going to happen in the next few weeks with some more of these restrictions coming up. But to answer your question in regards to the menu, it's really a distillation of Chris's experiences in fine dining and his travels around the world. And there's a little bit of influence from just the multiculturalism and diversity of Los Angeles and the different types of food and different types of, like I said, culture that exists in this city. So it's a fine dining American menu, but there is a lot of global influence, obviously a lot of French influence and French technique coming from the fine dining side. But, for those who haven't had it, you'll just have to come in and see.
Right.
Yep.
So what are your expectations? What do you think you're going to see once you're able to really fully open?
So I think for the nature of our conversation for restaurants, certainly having a bar that people can sit at is a driver, particularly in full service restaurants. Like, you're not always going to sell someone a tasting menu. You're not always going to have them come in and want to spend $300. Like, you almost have to have that entry level introduction, especially to a new concept. Like Fellow, I consider to be a new restaurant because it's a whole new team. It's a whole new menu. We've really been working hard to sort of distance ourselves, if you will, from what we were pre-pandemic, and really establish ourselves as a fine dining restaurant. But not every single person that was a customer or is discovering the restaurant necessarily wants to come in and, dive all the way into your most expensive or most extravagant option. So having a bar, and we are launching a bites menu, a bar menu, this phenomenal burger that Chris has come up with, alongside of, just to be honest with you, I think one of the best bar programs in Los Angeles. And we haven't even talked about beer yet. Matthew Payne, who was also another guy who came to us from 11 Madison Park and did their beer program alongside being their maitre d' for, I think, 6 or 7 years at EMP in New York, is doing our beer program. He's our maitre d' here now as well and runs all guest services. So we've got from the wine to the cocktails to the beer, really kind of a full offering. And I think there's really, the great thing about Fellow is there's really something for everybody. If you want to come in and experience like an incredible, world-class tasting menu, you can do that, and great wine list and all the things that accompany that tasting menu. But if you want to come in and have a burger and a great beer, you can do that too, right? So I think there's something for everyone. And I think that's really going to be the beauty of this place. There's so many spaces. It's large. There's 1,000 square foot event space upstairs that, you can run private events in. We have a private dining room, a private bar, a private entrance. And then the cool thing about this place that I touched on before is there's actually an art gallery that we built during COVID that's attached to the restaurant. You actually enter the restaurant through the art gallery. So you come in, the host stand is set up there, you check in, and then you have, as long as you like, 5, 6, 10 minutes before you sit down in the restaurant to peruse the art gallery, take a look at some world-class art.
So now tell us about Imari. You have another restaurant that you're just about to open. Tell us what that will be. This is going to be in Brentwood, which is in a neighborhood, very close, also very high end in West LA.
Open for full dining at Imari on July the 9th. So we're coming up on opening time there. That team is also very strong. Executive chef there is a guy by the name of David Schlosser. If you're an LA food person, you probably know David. He won a Michelin star at Shibumi. His restaurant, Shibumi, was named the #2 restaurant in LA in 2018 by LA Times. Just a very well pedigreed and just a great guy. Classically trained in Japan and France, so it comes from a 3-star Michelin background as well. And he trained at a restaurant in Kyoto called Kikanoi. The person who is our chef de cuisine at the restaurant Imari is a guy by the name of Derek Wilcox. And David and Derek actually met at Kikanoi in Kyoto years ago, and they were both apprenticing. They were, 2 of the only Americans that were at the restaurant in Kyoto. And they happened to forge a relationship, as you would, and kept in touch over all these years. And when we were looking for #2, Derek was actually in New York at the time at a restaurant called Shoju in Tribeca, very highly pedigreed restaurant, focusing more on a tasting menu concept. But Derek is well regarded, and the New York Times even gave him this accolade, saying he's one of the best in the world at sort of the longer form, like omakase tasting menus. So we will unveil a tasting menu there. We're starting off with a delivery only model. We're starting off with bento boxes. We're going to roll into dining, and we're not going to offer the tasting menu initially, but it's a cuisine that's more familiar to probably native Japanese folks versus Americans. What's called washoku, and it's a little bit more of a kind of a casual take on fine dining, but very, very quality ingredients. Obviously, a focus on vegetables, focus on the fish. And it's going to be, I think, very different than what most are expecting from a Japanese restaurant in America. I think over the years, it's, if I could go out on a limb here, say it's been watered down a little bit in terms of what we consider to be authentic Japanese cuisine. And this, given that it's David and Derek who train classically in Japan and really know that country and really know the cuisine there very well, it's going to feel, I think, very different than what most Americans are used to when they order Japanese food here. So I'm excited. I think it's going to take a little bit of time for people to get used to it because it is a little bit off center. But I do think that it's going to be so good and so authentically, authentically creative that people are going to gravitate towards it, and we'll find a deep audience for that restaurant.
And why do it delivery only first? I mean, that's kind of an interesting way to introduce something when it's fairly unknown. Why do it that way?
A couple of reasons. Number one, we have to operate there for a period of time without dine-in from a permitting standpoint.
Oh.
So, and also over the years, I've really started to understand it. It actually worked out well. And I wanted to do this anyway, permitting aside. Regardless of that side, if you don't focus on delivery and really figure out how to do that properly, and you open as a fine dining restaurant, I found that over time, it can be sort of deprioritized within the launch. And if we don't really learn how to do it and focus on it for a month or 6 weeks, it just doesn't become part of the program. And I think also marketing and delivery within a Japanese concept, all of this food is very deliverable. And I think we will have a high propensity of our audience that does order it to go or to be delivered. So we want to focus on that and make sure we can do a great job.
So the one thing I also wanted to ask you about is that in addition to both of these things, you have a new podcast, which is so interesting that you're doing this, called Happy Mouth.
Yes.
And you are doing this with Naisha Arrington, right?
I am. Yeah. Good friend.
Yeah. So tell us about that. What's your goal with that?
So we started it because, well, first of all, our partner and really the producer of it is Yelp for restaurants. So Yelp is taking this sort of foray into content creation and working with people like myself and people like Naisha to help them create relevant content for not only their audience of restaurateurs and people who work in hospitality and, you know, their entire audience base, but also for, you know, people like us who just want to know what's happening in the business every single day. We talk about things that are relevant, that are going to affect people who work in hospitality every single day. A little bit of a focus on restaurants, so that we touch on hotel news and we touch on things that are not necessarily focused primarily on restaurants. We talk a lot about what's happening with employees. We talk a lot about the stimulus packages. We talk a lot about sustainability. And we're starting to talk just a lot more about where this business goes, what the new model looks like, how we make this profitable, and the model works for all stakeholders, not just owners, not just employees, not just vendors, not just the customer, but everyone together. And that's really what the focus of it is to try and figure out how all of us who are stakeholders in this thing called hospitality, how we all make it work coming out of this pandemic and what it looks like for the next 5, 10, 15 years.
Make sure to check out our next Rising Star, debuting on the third Wednesday of every month. And if you know someone who is a rising star, let us know at lisa.jennings, JENNINGS @informa.com.